Welcome to Smart Remarks, where if you're wearing a hoodie, you must be a criminal, or at least some people seem to think so. So I like to think that maybe someday God will play a joke on your average white, male, conservative Fox News viewer by making him wake up one morning as a black man. It'd be sort of a just dessert, because in the wake of the George Zimmerman Trayvon Martin case, it seems to me there's no group less capable of empathy, less able to walk a mile in someone else's shoes than your average white, male, conservative Fox News viewer. I'm not going to get into the trial or the verdict itself. I think it was pretty complicated. It wasn't as black or white as a lot of people wanted it to be. But what has fascinated me is the reaction to the verdict. You know, if you're African American, you can maybe be excused for feeling like you're in a time warp where nothing ever changes. But what slays me is the inability of a lot of white people to understand this. Sometime when you have a few hours or a few days, look up the history of racial violence in the United States. Look up the race riots of the late 19-teens or the 20s, where black people were basically hunted down and killed like animals. Look up the history of lynching. Look at some of the photographs, dead blacks surrounded by smiling whites. And understand that there was a time when white people were able to kill black people in this country with impunity. This was America. This was your America. This was your ancestors' America. But now your average white guy says, so what? What does any of that have to do with me? I'm not saying that George Zimmerman lynched Trayvon Martin, but what I am saying is that if your ancestors were property, and if your not too distant relatives had racism codified into law and were maybe the subject of violence, you might be excused for understanding the symbolism and significance of what happened to Trayvon Martin. And if you're a white guy and you don't understand that, maybe it's because you don't want to understand that. But see, what you have to get is that a lot of these conservatives resent all of this. You know, they're tired. They're tired of hearing how hard it is to be black in America. They're tired of hearing about blacks as victims. They're tired of this history even when they know it because, as I said, well, what does that got to do with me? And what you got to understand is that they also think the shoe's on the other foot now, too. Blacks get all the breaks. Look at affirmative action. Look at how blacks are made into martyrs by the liberal media. Look at the black-on-black crime that doesn't get reported by the liberal media. But what about this case? What about that case? If you followed the Drudge Report this week, you'd think that huge race riots were breaking out in every city in America. It was racial panic and race baiting at the same time. These are people who don't want to look at the Trayvon Martin case with a sense of history. They think it should all be considered in a vacuum, unrelated to anything that came before. But that is simply not possible. Do they ask, and this is what I wonder about these guys, do they ever sit around and think, you know, what if it was my kid? One of the things about being a liberal is you like to think you can walk a mile in someone else's shoes. And you think, what if it was my kid walking through a neighborhood with Skittles and a hoodie being followed by some strange dude? But then you realize, you know, my kids are white, so they probably wouldn't be deemed suspicious as Zimmerman deemed Trayvon Martin suspicious. That is the reality of race in America. And if you don't get that, again, it's because you don't want to get it. Trayvon Martin wasn't lynched, but neither did he die in a vacuum. You like to think that Americans can get past all of this. You like to think that while we're going to disagree, we can at least understand. But what we see over the course of the past week is that there's a lot of people who just don't want to understand. And I don't know how you get past that.